Hey everyone! I know I've been gone for a long time. Some of you may have feared I had forgotten about this channel. Don't worry, that is far from the case. Instead, I've been working on something. Something very big.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
I spared no expense. Hello animal lovers, welcome to the Zoology Girl channel and to another episode of the series Species Summary. I am your host Strawbaby, and yes, I'm finally back! After over a year of roadblocks such as school, illness, holiday commission work, having the newest Pokemon and Animal Crossing games consume my soul. Psst! Hop is a good boy, and the best rival. Screw anyone who says otherwise. Gloria X Hop is life! Graduation, and a lot of BS and craziness with COVID and voting. I'm back with my completed biology degree to make actual videos and not random memes and zoo clips. And today we're doing something a little different. On this channel, I try not to talk about animals that are well known, pets, and those that people tend to know a lot about. Lions was an exception because there's a lot of misinformation about them. But generally, I want to teach people something new about animals that don't get a lot of recognition. Leopard geckos are like one of the three most common, if not the most common, lizards that's kept as a pet. And there are a lot of leopard gecko care guides and videos online. However, there is still so much misinformation being spread around about them by the very places most people have to go to get a hold of one. So I felt like throwing my 2 cents into the ring. Also, Leos aren't really domesticated and are still technically exotic pets, so they still count as wild animals. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get started, shall we? Alright, so we're gonna have to bring up the whole bird issue again, cause scientists are a bit fickle about this. Reptiles have a complicated taxonomy cause they aren't a monophyletic group, and scientists don't like it when things aren't monophyletic, even though technically birds and mammals are the only true monophyletic animal groups. What is monophyletic? Well, monophyletic groups are sections of an evolutionary tree that can be broken off at specific ancestral points, and encompass everything that follows into a singular group. Birds kind of throw a monkey wrench into everything and broke off from the group crocs and turtles came from, so people often debate about them being reptiles because people still want to cling to the idea that dinosaurs were reptiles, when mounting evidence really suggests they had more in common with birds than any lizard. So just keep that in mind, I guess, when we get to that point. Anyways, our little gecky friends are reptiles, and thus belong in the class Reptilia. They're exotherms, aka cold-blooded, have scales, lay eggs with a shell, are diapsid, meaning they have 2 holes in the side of their heads, and all that jazz. They then fall under the superorder Lepidosauria, which are reptiles with overlapping scales, and in my opinion, the true reptiles. Yeah, you heard me, I said it. I think lepidosaurs and archosaurs should be split into 2 different classes instead of having this argument over are birds reptiles or are dinosaurs birds. Crocs and turtles can be called birds now for all I care. But honestly, this is the split that makes the most sense because it happened around the early Triassic when mammals really came into their own as a class of their own, and hey! Ah! Okay, I won't rant about that again. I'll keep to only the facts that scientists have come to a consensus on. Till I make an opinion rant video, that is. Anyways, the order for the leopard gecko is Squamata, which contains literally all snakes, lizards, and legless lizards except for the Tuatara, which gets its own little order called Rhinocerophalia, because it's a freak of nature with prehistoric features and a 3rd eye. Yeah. Freak little guy. I'm gonna have to make a video about it in the future. Let me guess where it's from. Australia, everyone! Wait, it's not Australia for once? Oh! I mean, Australia's equally weird neighbor, New Zealand, everyone! Anyways, back to our gecko friend. They fall into the suborder Scleroglossia, which contains some lizards but not all. Some lizards are actually much closely related to snakes than others. I told you that reptile clade is screwy. This suborder contains all snakes and most lizards, except for iguanas, chameleons, and their close relatives. The reason for this break has to do with the tongue's evolution, a weirdly specific trait in my opinion, but okay. The infraorder after that is Geckoda, which contains all geckos and some limbless lizards. After that, they fall into the family Eublepharidae, which are geckos without sticky toe pads, but some make up for it by having moving eyelids. They still lick their eyes pretty often, though. It's weird. The genus of the leopard gecko is Eublepharus, which it shares with 5 other gecko species separated based on region, and its species name is Macularis. There are actually 5 or so subspecies, but only one has a common name, the Afghan leopard gecko or common leopard gecko, so we won't be talking about them much. Oh god, we just got done with taxonomy. You see, this is the reason why I don't do reptile videos often. Like all lizards, leopard geckos are exothermic animals, meaning they rely on their environment to control their temperature. The environments they live in are hot and dry, so they have little adaptation to deal with a cold spell. Also, like all lizards, their teeth only have one shape, and these guys have some very, very small teeth, mostly relying on their jaw strength to kill prey, as they are insectivores. And once they break through the exoskeleton of their prey, they pretty much have a meal secured. They have 100 tiny teeth, and they regularly lose and replace those teeth throughout their lifetime. Imagine if there was a gecko tooth fairy. In the wild, their prey mostly consists of invertebrates, including deadly scorpions. Note: do not feed your leopard gecko scorpions. Most leopard geckos in captivity have been separated from their wild counterparts for several generations, and while not domesticated, have likely lost most of the adaptations that allow them to take on such extreme prey. After all, these are the same animals that can now become terrified of crickets and superworms if bitten by them. Reptiles continuously grow, although usually slow down quite a bit by the time they reach adulthood. Leopard geckos generally grow between 6 to 8 inches long in their lifetime, with the males usually reaching the 8-inch mark more often. There are some exceptions though. A morph called supergiants can reach over a foot in length. These geckos usually don't live as long, however. The average leopard gecko lives for 15 to 20 years in captivity if properly cared for. Meanwhile, a supergiant is lucky if it reaches 10 years old. While males are slightly larger than females, there isn't much sexual dimorphism between them. The head is usually slightly broader, and the males tend to be more aggressive behavior-wise. The most recognizable feature is a patch of pores and 2 bulges near the cloaca. These are called the preanal pores and the hemipenal bulge. A leopard gecko's scales are extremely small and close together, making them have very different textures compared to other reptiles like snakes. Speaking from experience, it's a lot like petting a hairless cat. These geckos also have thick tails and many pouches on their body for storing fat, including under their armpits. These are important for living in the habitats which they do, as the fat stores can be used to sustain the animal when food is scarce, and also can be converted into water during times of drought. So yes, this makes them the right amount of soft and squishy to achieve peak adorableness, and to invade our home like cats. Unfortunately, this means they are also very prone to obesity like cats are. The second use for their tail is that it can be dropped and regrown to help escape predators. However, the regrown tail is very different from the original, and usually much stumpier. Interestingly though, if a gecko doesn't fully drop its tail, another will still try to form, causing a split tail to form. You know, like those cats from Japanese mythos. I'm beginning to sense a pattern here. Finally, let's talk about the interesting genetics of leopard geckos. One of the reasons leopard geckos are so popular as pets is due to the variety of genes that control their cryptic patterning. Cryptic coloration is a type of coloration that allows animals to better blend into their environment. No 2 geckos have the same pattern, But beyond that, they don't just come in black and yellow. Leopard geckos are one of the best examples of different genetic processes as a result. I'll go into more detail when I talk about how their history aligns with humans, but for now, I'll give a brief overview of things. There is the wild type, or most common morph. There are morphs based on recessive traits, or genes you need two of to express, such as albinism or blizzard. Dominant traits, meaning one copy of the gene is needed to express them in the line, like Max Snow. And there are line traits, like tangerine, in which, over the generations of selective breeding, those who have the most prominent displays of the genes in their phenotype, the trait becomes increasingly exaggerated. When this happens in the wild, it usually is referred to as runaway sexual selection, as usually it can only happen when there is a specific trait increasing the animal's chances of mating. And because multiple genes control the patterns of these animals, a multitude of combinations can occur, and new morphs or breeds are developed all the time. Leopard geckos are known for their docility in domestic environments, but this does not mean all are super friendly. These are wild prey animals. Most of their docility comes from the fact that their main strategy in defense is either pretending they don't exist or fleeing and hiding, as their weak jaws and small claws do not allow them to fight back very well against larger individuals. A leopard gecko is more likely to run from you than it is to sit in your hand if it's not been tamed. Their most well-known strategy for avoiding predators, aside from dropping their tails, is making noise. Geckos in general are the most vocal lizards, having a variety of sounds for social cues and to ward off potential predators. They click and huff to show discomfort and annoyance, and in times of severe stress will imitate squeaky toy noises to scare away large animals. Well, scare is a strong word. Usually it just surprises them because it's so loud that they don't expect such a tiny animal to make such a noise, giving the gecko just enough time to run away. Their most famous noise, however, is exclusive to juveniles and is quite possibly the most adorably pitiful noise in the entire animal kingdom. The gecko scream. Yep, that was it. Hatchlings are stumbling and mostly helpless, especially because leopard geckos don't tend to defend their nests or hatchlings at all. New Mothers of the Year Award winner, everyone. As such, their main form of defense to escape bigger things is to scream at them, and they will scream at anything. Hands, rocks, their own food, someone flashing a light on them, literally anything that moves because they have so much pent-up fear and rage inside their itty-bitty little bodies. I'm not sure how actually effective it is, since all it makes me want to do is pick them up and kiss their little heads and play with their itty-bitty little hands. Another important strategy to protect themselves in the wilderness is their crepuscular nature. Crepuscular means that an animal is most active at dawn and dusk. This allows the gecko to avoid most of its predators, who are either mostly nocturnal or mostly diurnal. This means that these little guys sleep a lot, much like cats. To be completely honest, the name leopard gecko is more appropriate than you think for multiple reasons. Behavior-wise, especially, they have many things in common with our feline friends. They enjoy basking and laying on anything warm, lash their tails and arch themselves to show annoyance, lick themselves, including their rear end, stalk their prey, wiggle their tails to show excitement, slow blink to show satisfaction, generally live solitary lives in the wild, defecate in specific areas of their territory, attempt to be arboreal despite not being built for that, attempt to crawl into any crevice or container they can fit into, and frankly be absolute derps 90% of the time when they are active. Now, why is this the case? Clearly, they aren't very closely related, as they haven't shared a common ancestor in hundreds of millions of years, right? Well, the answer to you might be obvious. I'll answer the question anyways. There is such a phenomenon called convergent evolution, where animals faced with similar problems and environments adapt similar methods of survival. Think shark and dolphin have similar body shapes. Leopard geckos hold a similar niche to small wildcat species as effective obligate carnivores that stalk small prey items in rocky, dry areas while still being at risk for predation by other large animals. As such, the behavior that allows these two very different animals to survive in this niche tend to overlap. Behavior is one of the easiest things to change across generations, as unlike genes, you don't have to wait for a series of lucky mutations to occur to have a successful adaptation. One can change behavior within their own lifetime, though some are definitely harder to change than others. Like my other gecko, Boba's insistence on trying to escape at literally every opportunity. Lizards and geckos split off from other reptiles millions of years ago before the ancestors of dinosaurs even existed, and just like our mammalian ancestors, had to escape the jaws of hungry dinosaurs on the regular. During the time of humans, the leopard gecko didn't have it very easy for a long time either. In their native home of Pakistan and India, reptiles and amphibians, with the exception of crocodiles and turtles, have long been considered evil in nature or bad omens. Geckos specifically are reviled as enemies of Muhammad, as in stories they destroyed a skin sack of water he was bringing to his grandson. Some believe leopard geckos to be venomous, which they aren't, as they were once thought to be a close cousin of cobras. Children in general are discouraged from keeping any reptiles as pets, and some even believe that their bumpy skin is filled with poison like a toad's, and will ruin any food you prepare if they touch it. This bad reputation has caused them to be persecuted for centuries, and although officially scientifically documented in 1855 by Dr. Blythe, outside of a few taxonomic debacles resulting in family changes, there was little to no interest in these little lizards until the 1970s, when they began to be captured from the wild and sold in the exotic pet trade. Despite most exotics suffering from the pet trade, this is probably one of the few cases where there was somewhat of a benefit to these animals having been captured and sold, as the huge, genetically diverse captive populations and years of genetic study of these animals by breeders could potentially save these animals in the case of catastrophe, which I will get to in a bit. I'm not supporting the exotic pet trade, and these animals certainly have suffered at the hands of traders and poachers, but their story is far from the worst, is the point I'm trying to get across. While there was a long history of capture of reptiles in the Americas for zoos, meat, scientific study, and recreation, and exotic pets had long been a concept, the 20th century and post-World War II Americans were quickly becoming enthralled by the idea of exotic pets. Hell, one could even find extremely incorrect pet alligator care guides being printed as early as the late 1950s. Wild-caught snakes, turtles, and lizards were caught by young and old alike and sold as pets for nickels and dimes. And with improvement of transport and the advent of chain pet stores that carried live animals in the 1970s, animals from around the world could be relatively cheaply accessible to the average person, and changed the world of the exotic pet trade, and in general caused massive issues such as destruction of wild populations, rampant animal abuse, invasive species, and the modern fungal plague killing off amphibian species. Again, exotic pet trade, not a great thing. Reptiles like ball pythons, iguanas, and beardies were being trafficked into the States and distributed from wholesale reptile sellers, and due to how common they were in the wild and their hardiness, leopard geckos debuted in the States. This time period was absolutely awful for the animals, as no one knew anything in general about reptile husbandry unless you worked at the zoo. And few people cared, sadly, as reptiles were treated as novelty toys, not with the same respect as their mammalian counterparts. As the 1980s rolled around, breeding reptiles became a more profitable venture, as there was a huge boom in the popularity of reptiles as pets, making it worth keeping several breeder animals around for the next year's breeding season, rather than work with a middleman to import animals. As the 90s ended, things slowly began to change in the legality of capturing from the wild, as the US government cracked down on reptile capture from wild and named more animals to become protected species, causing breeding to have an even bigger push to prominence. The shift from importing to breeding made sellers have to care about the animals more to some degree and learn about their care, genetics, behavior, etc. And because of this, the leopard gecko was able to rise to fame among exotic keepers and breeders for their relatively easy care and the magnificent rainbow of morphs possible hidden in their genetic code. Most animals have one or two possible morph varieties, but leopard geckos? They have hundreds! You got Max Snow, albinos, hypos, carrot tails, tangerines, enigma morph, blizzards, melanistic, patternless, and many of these can be mixed and matched to create dozens more combinations of colors and patterns. And while some, like enigma morphs, have genetic defects in their morph, most are healthy, and the sheer complexity of the genetics controlling for patterns in these animals is awe-inspiring, and has allowed for a lot of headway to be made about knowledge on their health and physiology. While there is still discourse over how these animals should be cared for and how they are treated today, things have changed greatly and generally positively for these animals since they were first introduced into the exotic pet trade. Most leopard geckos nowadays are bred in captivity, though some are still captured from the wild. And although still a niche pet, the sheer number of groups dedicated to sharing info and care about these animals is staggering. Little is still known about the wild populations in comparison, including exact numbers due to political instability in the area and still prevalent general lack of concern for herps in some areas of the Middle East and Southeast Asia. There are even some rumors of subspecies becoming endangered, though I can only find one or two news sources on that aren't necessarily reputable. Concern for wild populations is warranted somewhat, however, because on top of wars, past persecution of the animals, the pet trade, and human expansion to their native range, climate change is an ever-present issue for animals all over the world, and all these little stressors can lead up to a big problem. However, with their current popularity in captivity, I doubt we'll see these guys disappear anytime soon. The question would be more, can these animals be rehabilitated rather than can we stop them from disappearing altogether? Just remember to be kind to lizards and reptiles of all kinds. They may not be fluffy, but they can be as sweet as any mammal and deserve our respect. Except mine. I reserve the right as their owner to lovingly mock them relentlessly. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider subscribing or supporting me on Patreon. But most importantly, have a wonderful day.